here.
We're in the dentist's office.
You're in the dentist's office?
Dentist, yeah. They're grinding my teeth.
I have a Dremel tool in the sanding disc.
Okay.
Who is that above Dennis and
Connie.
Connie? Yeah.
Everybody gets up and leaves.
Yeah.
Pastor, sorry I was late, but I did reply to you.
You did. Thank you. Everybody's being really quiet. There's the door, but no people in it. I can't read, it's too far away. Maybe you should bring this closer. It's better. No, I do not. Okay.
Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Hi, Ryan.
Let's read it.
No, I mean the windows with nobody in it.
And then no here in a second.
That's Connie Kirsten, I guess.
There you go.
There you go. It's just invisible.
Talked about joining us, so we're gonna wait just a minute till she gets here.
Good afternoon.
How are you, Karen?
Good.
Has,
How are you?
has spring come to Wisconsin now?
Well, it was 84 in Janesville yesterday,
Whoa.
but today it's only going to be 62, I think.
Yeah.
And tomorrow a little colder again, but we got a taste of it.
A little tease.
It was beautiful. Yeah, it was gorgeous yesterday.
82 here.
Today. Well, I sent it down there to you guys. So you got to send some back.
Right, real soon.
I just joined. What's the temperature where you're at, Karen?
Right now?
Yeah.
Maybe 62 or something.
I'm at 55
Oh,
in Wisconsin.
where at Wisconsin?
Menasha, which is close to Appleton, or halfway
right.
between Milwaukee and Madison.
Nina Menasha area.
Right.
That's further north.
I did have some good cheese curds for lunch, though.
Oh, yeah. Okay. 50, it says it's 59 here right now. It's supposed to get up by later this afternoon, I think up to 52. You know, like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So maybe another 2-3 degrees. What is it up there? 50 what?
55 right now.
Okay.
It's been cool the last couple of days, a high of 57. But I was up in Minnesota for the confirmation, which was outside, which was in the high 40s, and a couple birthday parties. It's been overcast, rain, drizzly, but they still need rain.
Oh, we haven't gotten much rain here at all. We really need it.
So, yeah.
They keep predicting rain and we get a few dribbles, you know, a little mistiness or a little bit, and then it's gone. We just haven't been getting it at all.
Didn't
Sorry,
you get snow? Didn't you have snow this winter?
I wasn't here in the winter.
Karen,
I
did you
was, yes, we did.
We did not, I did not.
surf?
I didn't see-
Okay, Rita. For some reason, I believe you.
I did get to see snow flurries, if so to speak, when I was hiking in a state park with my oldest son on his birthday, when today he turned 45. But I mean, you're talking like maybe you saw 100 in front of your face and looked at a distance. And that was the most I've seen snow, and that's more than enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah, we shouldn't see any more now. We're almost the 1st of May here coming up, so. It's supposed to be April showers,
Right.
and then we've been gypped out of a lot of that, so.
But the tulips and the daffodils are beautiful
Yep.
right now.
Well, my daffodils were, my tulips, the deer ate them.
They're really good.
Oh, wives' tale. You were supposed to take, what did you used to put in hope chest to help me? Those little things, you know, before you had cedar hope chest, those little mothballs. Supposedly if you put mothballs around, deer won't eat them.
Oh, I wish I'd known that about 3-4 years ago, because I had all along the south and some on the east I had them planted. And the first year or so, it was gorgeous, but then they just come in and eat not only the flower, but the leaves. And I guess that can't feed the bulb again, so I just kept losing them. Anything that comes up, they'd eat.
Yep, they're hungry.
Daffodils must taste like something bitter to them. I don't know, but they don't eat them. Oh, thank you.
Okay, we ready to get started?
Yep.
All right, if everybody will mute, I'll go ahead and open with a prayer and then we'll get started. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to come together and study your word. We ask that you would open our hearts and minds to the leading of your spirit and help us to understand and share with each other our insights and our understanding of what you have given us in your word. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. The next couple of chapters here are very confusing, to say the least. We're going to go through it a little differently. I hope you've all read it ahead of time, because I'm not going to go ahead and retranslate it for you and read, out of the Hebrew, but we're just going to go over the notes because there's so much in here about what's going on. This section is called the Sinai tradition, or another way to describe it is the theophany at Sinai. A theophany is actually a revelation of God. Theos is the word for God, and phanos is to bring to light or to reveal. So it's a revelation of God, a theophany. Anytime in the Old Testament that God appears, there's usually smoke and or fire. Mostly fire, but a lot of times smoke. Remember way back when Abraham made the covenant with God and God made the covenant with him, Abraham walked through the parts of the animals, and then God passed through in the shape of a smoking fire pot. Remember that? That's a theophany. That's God revealing himself. But what's interesting about this is it's such a theological revelation in this whole thing. The people knew of God. They didn't really know how powerful he was or who he actually was. What we've seen so far in the Exodus story is Moses tried to tell them, they listened, and yet they didn't obey. So now God's going to say, from this point on, you better listen and pay attention, because it's going to get real from now on. Okay? So part of the whole process of 19 through 24, the chapters 19 through 24, it can get a little bit confusing without a roadmap. So I mailed out to everybody, or emailed to you, the outline of these chapters, so that you've got that. And if you haven't got that, let me know and I'll send it again. But that'll help us go through a lot of this stuff. But what you need to know is that verses 19, or chapter 19, I'm trying to think of, I got to look at the outline myself. Let's see. after verse 25 of chapter 19, chapter 20, verses 1 through 12, or 1 through 17, actually, that's the 10 Commandments. That comes next, and then 19 finishes up, and then comes chapter 20, verses 18 through 21. Somehow it got separated multiple centuries ago. We don't know how or why, but it did. So we're left with a broken up text. The other problem with that is as we started Exodus, you remember me telling you that there are 3 sources most of the time. Sometimes there's even 4. Well, no, there wouldn't be 4 yet because the Deuteronomy, well, there is actually. There is 4. Deuteronomy, the Deuteronomistic historian is in there as well. So there are all 4 sources in here. So you'll get a lot of repetition. You'll get a lot of going through it. And then several verses later, you get the same thing repeated again. That's a second tradition coming in, second source. So you've got all these different things going on. But what's really important that you need to take away from this today is the theophany, the revelation of God, who he is, how he works, just how holy he actually is the all-important part of this. The P source, the priestly source, is very predominant in this, but the Yahweh source, the J source, is also. So that's where we're going to start, is obviously with verse 1 of chapter 19, but know that this is all about God revealing himself to the people, revealing his covenant, putting his stamp on the people, asking them, demanding of them their loyalty and their faithfulness. And he's also at the same time not only acknowledging, but setting Moses up as the intercessor or the go-between between God and his people. So Moses becomes the spokesperson. And we'll get to all of that in a little bit. Anyway, verses 1 through 9, we'll start with that section. It's sort of the first couple of verses is sort of an introduction to what led up to Mount Sinai, where they're at. Oh, and by the way, let me get back out of the way a little bit. The picture behind me is actually Mount Sinai, and those are not shadows from clouds on the top. You could actually see paths from animals and stuff through there. Mount Sinai is actually burnt on the top. That rock is all blackened as if it were at one point volcanic. And of course, you know, with the biblical tradition that smoke and fire covered the mountain while Moses was up there talking to God. There you go. The whole top of the mountain, both peaks, it's double peaks, are burnt almost like there was some sort of a volcanic inferno going on at that time. A lot of the granite and basalt are melted and fused together. And yet you can see over the centuries where goats and sheep, whatever else is up there, made all those paths across the top in the burnt rock. So that's Mount Sinai, dual mountains or dual peaks. That's where Moses went up to talk to God, and God told Moses what to do with the people and how to handle them and all those other kinds of things. So anyway, God is beginning a new chapter in the life of Israel here, and it's about to become a very special day. So what God wants the people to do before this all happens is to get ready. Prepare yourselves. And when you're dealing with God, and it's going to be a very special occasion, God demands that you be consecrated. You forget what's going on in the world. Your main focus is on God here. Okay? And you get that with the command that's there in the first 9 verses, where God tells the people, or Moses actually tells the people, go and wash your clothes. They very rarely washed their clothes anywhere, anytime, very rarely. But this is a special day. This is where you're going to learn all about your relationship with God and his relationship with you. You're going to learn about how holy God is, and God wants you to take this seriously. So this is going to be set apart from normal day-to-day business. So the first thing he wants you to do is wash your clothes. This is all about the renewal of the covenant. As I said, God made that covenant with Abraham all those generations ago. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all the way down now to Moses. And now Moses is reintroducing them to the covenant and reiterating that covenant to them of what God demands of them. Okay, it's going to be a proclamation in verse 4 of God's mighty deeds, the conditions of the covenant, verses 5 and 6, kind of, it's a highlight of it, and then the response of commitment in 7 and 8. Now, the invitation to a covenant is based on the great divine acts of the past, which Israel enjoyed on their behalf by God. All the things that he did, culminating in leading them out of slavery, out of Egypt, and into the wilderness, setting them free. And now, before they go any further, he wants to make sure that the people understand the relationship that God has with his people. And it highlights all the negative effects that God had on Egypt, how he utterly destroyed them, destroyed their army and their leader, Pharaoh, and everybody else. He watched over them, he protected them, he took care of them. He brought them to Sinai first. This is not God going to the people, he's bringing the people to him. And as we know from all the things that we've studied, where you encounter the deity is up on a high place. That's why Sinai, because it's not where God lives, but that's where he encounters Moses and they hear his voice and everything else. So you get the promise offered now, immediately. This is happening here and now. It's a decisive day. A special relationship is promised, but there are expectations that God has of the people. Okay? Now, three different terms spell out the uniqueness of this covenant relationship. That Israel is a special possession. They're distinct from all other people. And let's see, that's called Gegolach Mechol Ha-Amim, which essentially in Hebrew means these are God's people, Yahweh's people. The second part of that, there's, like I said, there's three terms of the covenant. That they are God's people is number one. Number two, that they are a kingdom or a nation of priests. There isn't just one or two people or representatives that practice the relationship with God. Everybody is expected to. And of course, the Hebrew term for that is Mamlechet Kahanim. And then, of course, the last one and the most important one that God's going to base all this covenant stuff on is that they are a holy nation. The people of Israel are a holy nation because they're God's people. God has brought them here and God is making them holy. He's setting them apart. And so they become Goy Charos. Okay? Those are the three Hebrew terms, like you really care, right? But anyway, they're to be interpreted, these three terms, in relationship to each other. Israel is God's own people, set apart from the rest of the nations. Number two, Israel as a people are dedicated to God's service as priests. And finally, number three, the life of Israel will be equal to or lived in conjunction with the holiness of God. So the people are expected to be as holy as God is. There are people set apart. They don't do things like normal people do. They're a holy people. They're God's people, okay? But now here's the thing. Once Moses tells this to the people, they immediately agree to it. Oh yes, we'll do anything that God wants us to do, they say. And yet, they haven't heard the conditions of the covenant. And this is going to come back and bite them in the butt in a little bit. And we'll get to that, okay? Now, this covenant relationship has been offered through Moses to the people of Israel. They respond with enthusiastic acceptance. And the whole section, this first 9 verses, anticipates what's going to happen. It doesn't tell yet. They just anticipate we're all going to live happily ever after, is what Israel is thinking. They don't really get what Moses and God have said to this point. The rest of chapters 19 and 20 unfold and lay out the full implications of this covenant relationship and what exactly this means to be in this kind of a relationship with God and God to be in this kind of a relationship with his people. And once they find out, they want to reconsider almost immediately. They decide, whoa, this is a little scary for us. You know, we want Moses to deal with God, and then Moses can tell us. We don't want to be in that relationship with God directly. So they immediately weasel out of the first part of the covenant, which they've already agreed to, and then they weasel out of it later. But the covenant hasn't been completed yet. And the Old Testament term for that is you seal a covenant. You do something together so that both parties are bound by that covenant relationship. So the invitation to the covenant is addressed to all the people, the entire nation, and then the people agree to it. And then God says, Moses, come on up in the mountain. I want to talk to you specifically. So God comes down on the mountain in a shroud of fire and smoke, as evidenced by the burnt top of the mountain there, so that Israel may hear God speaking with Moses and thereby acknowledge that God and Moses are in a very special relationship because Moses is up on God's mountain. Now remember, when Moses was first called, he was on a mountain and God spoke to him there. Now they're on another mountain and God is speaking to him again, although through the smoke and the fire and the theophany, the revelation of himself, the people now are witness to what God is saying to Moses and Moses is saying to God. That again authorizes Moses to be the person that Israel recognizes him to be. Okay, now the next section, 10 through 24, the next 14 verses. God tells Moses to get the people ready for this special day. There's going to be 2 days of preparation, and then on the third day, we will make the covenant together. Okay? There's the number 3, a holy number. A lot of things happen on the third day, including the resurrection of Jesus. So Moses gets his instructions that Israel is to become a chados, a holy nation. And the demand is there by God for the people to purify themselves. That means they are to clean themselves. They are to clean their clothes. They are to clean what they eat. They're supposed to be ritually pure. Nothing unclean. You can't touch any dead animals. You can't do all kinds of things because you have to be pure in order to enter into this relationship with God. And then this is where, in these verses, is where they get the command to wash their clothes, which signifies that this is something very significant and very solemn. The people are sealed off. God sets a boundary around the base of the mountain, and the people can't come any closer. And of course, why can't they come any closer? Because if they come into God's presence, what's going to happen to the people? They're going to die, right? They can't be in God's presence. So God says to the people, or Moses says to the people, you can come this far and no further. You can't come any closer than this. There's always going to be somebody that's going to want to sneak up on the mountain and actually get a glimpse of God or take a selfie with him or something. But that God is saying that's not going to happen. Okay. So Moses tells the people, this is what you've got to do. You've got to purify yourselves. You got to consecrate yourselves. You got to get ready for this. And in his instructions, he gets very specific because there's a phrase in there where it says, do not go near a woman. That does not mean that women are unclean. That means do not enter into relations with a woman, okay? Which in and of itself was not a bad thing. Because even in the Garden of Eden, God said to Adam and Eve, go forth and multiply. They get off the ark, go forth and multiply. There's nothing wrong with that. But at this point in time, because of what we're doing here between God and his people, we don't want you distracted. We don't want you thinking about those things. We want you only focused on what God is doing in this covenant relationship. So those kind of things are to be put aside for right now. This is a special time. It requires special actions, which result in, if you do them properly, you will be consecrated or set apart as God's people for his purpose. So they do all these preparations on day 1 and day 2, and then we get to day 3. It says in the morning there's thunder and lightning, a heavy cloud is over the mountain, and increasingly the sound of the shofar. You guys know what a shofar is? Okay, this is a shofar. I don't know if you can see it. Can anybody see it? It's a ram's horn. It usually sits on the shelf in my office, and it's hollow. And you actually, the priests, when they called people to worship in the tabernacle and other places, when they walk around the walls of Jericho, all the priests had these, and they blew on them, very loud and very long. I'm not going to blow on this one because I don't do it real well. I probably don't do it right either. I can make noise with it, but that's about it. But anyway, that blows, the horn blows. That's what they're talking about. That's the shofar. It's a Hebrew word for horn, meaning a noisemaker. It also means the horn of a ram. Okay, so they blow that, and the sound gets louder and louder and louder and louder. But that's nothing compared to when God actually speaks. So now notice what happens. They've gone through these days of preparation. When God said, we're going to make a covenant together, you're going to be my people and I'm going to be your God. And the people all said, oh yes, we'll do whatever you say. Now what happens? All the people tremble because the mountain is shaking. There's thunder, there's lightning, there's fire. Moses leads them out to the mountain to stand there at the base of the mountain while he goes up on the mountain to talk to God. Once the people are in place, the writer again returns to describe the effect of God's presence up on Mount Sinai. Now, the imagery now is a little different than it was before, with the smoke and fire being very dominant. And remember, even when they were in the Exodus, it was a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. That's a theophany. God's revealing his presence to the people. So now he's really laying it on thick here. You got the fire, you got the thunder, you got the lightning and all these other things. But what happens is that it's so exaggerated at this point that the people start getting scared. And they back off and they actually leave the base of the mountain. In verse 19 is the climax of the whole scene. When the sound of the shofar or the horn has reached its greatest intensity, Moses is up on the mountain talking with God. God is heard answering Moses in a voice. It actually says that in the Hebrew. You can hear the voice of God speaking to Moses. So Moses is legitimized as the one who speaks with God on behalf of the people. He's God's special instrument, just as he had promised. And then verses 20 through 25, Moses is called back up on the mountain for further instruction. And he's to warn the people, God says, not to come any closer. Moses says, but God, I've already done that. You don't need to do this again. I've already done that. I've already warned them not to come any closer. But the preparations that have been put in place for the last 2 days, which preceded that moment on the third day, God didn't think that was enough. So he said, tell them again not to come any closer. Moses objects, and then he again reiterates how they prepared themselves. They're ready for the covenant promise and done all the preparations that needed to be done. Moses thought the people were ready only to learn that God is requiring even more. Now, the issue at stake wasn't whether or not God is a stuffy monarch who doesn't think enough honor has been shown to him, but instead, it's a warning that's given for the sake of all the people of Israel. Because if one person steps upon the holy mountain other than Moses, and of course Aaron, we learn later, anybody else steps on the mountain, all of Israel will be destroyed. Not just one or two people, not just the person who steps on the mountain, the whole nation will be destroyed. God is that serious about that, and he wants the people to know how serious he is. So he goes and tells Moses, if one person steps foot on my mountain, everybody will perish. Okay? Not even the priests, who are usually in God's presence, in the tabernacle and every place else, cannot go on God's holy mountain. Only Moses and Aaron, those two alone, nobody else. Okay, once Moses gives that command, don't anybody set any foot on the mountain, the preparation is over, and now it's time for the covenant. Then God gives his laws to the people, i.e., the 10 Commandments. Or in Hebrew, the phrase is, let's see, I got to read it. Ha'eret Hadet Barim, which literally means in Hebrew, the 10 words. Very, very, not very exciting, is it? The 10 words. Oh, well, what does that mean? So then you get the 10 Commandments. Now, the 10 Commandments in and of themselves are it's another very interesting section in that, first of all, they're not in the order that we memorized them as kids. There's 3 different places in the Old Testament where the 10 Commandments are recorded, and in all 3 places, they're in a different order. Nobody knows why for sure. So that's kind of confusing in and of itself. It's in Deuteronomy 5, it's in Exodus 20. I'm trying to think where the other one is. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But anyway, we're going to go through the 10 Commandments real quick. Well, in the next 25 minutes. And we're going to get through the meanings of some of the things that are going on. God has made himself known to the people now. It's the day of the covenant, sealing of the covenant, and God's giving them his law. All right. So essentially, we would say in our day and age, it's time to pay the fiddler. God has done all these things for you. Now it's time. This is what you owe back to God. This is what God expects of you. And so that's why he's giving the 10 words, the 10 Commandments. Now, the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. There are so many things that are goofy about translating that. The first thing you need to know is that there's a Hebrew phrase, al paneh, which talks about, we say in English, you shall have no other gods before me. The best translation that scholars have come up with for this phrase, depending on how you look at the grammar, remember there's only 88 rules of grammar in all of Hebrew. And so the best that they can come up with is a direct translation is you will have no other gods in front of my face is the literal translation. Before my face. In other words, don't do this in front of me. Tell you why. But the most important thing is to remember, we translate it, you shall have no other gods besides me. You should have no other gods in place of me. We put all kinds of translations there. But really, God is God. He's claiming the number one position here. And notice what's not being said. the claim for God's exclusiveness in the sense that God alone has existence and no other gods even exist, that appears nowhere in the original Hebrew. And yet that's the way we've all heard it explained, including Luther's explanation of the first commandment. We've all said that, but that's not what it says in the Hebrew. What it says in the Hebrew is, I'm God and I'm here, and you better not bring any other gods into my presence because I'm God. I'm the Almighty One. And it would be offensive to God to have other gods in his presence. So the prohibition describes the relation of God or Yahweh to Israel. He is God, period. There are no other gods. He's the only one. As far as Israel is concerned, all other gods don't count. It doesn't say there aren't any other gods. It just says no other gods count between Yahweh and Israel. Okay? A lot of these commandments have way more than we've ever learned in confirmation class. All right, let's look at number 2. You shall not make yourself an image, a graven image, a lot of times it says. The prohibition of making a pesel is a Hebrew word for idol, or graven image, carved out of either stone or wood, and then later it come to mean stone, wood, or metal. No images of other gods of any kind. That's an absolute. A graven image, something that's worshipped as a god, would be contrary to Israel. It would be so offensive to God, it would be like spitting in his face. That's the gist of this commandment. So not only don't make any other images of other gods and have them there, but that would be so offensive to God that it would be like spitting in his face. And the reason for that is you have to understand the Oriental way of thinking, the Eastern way of thinking. It wasn't that these idols, these graven images of gods were powerful. They're just artifacts. They're just pieces of wood or stone or metal. But it was believed that a piece of wood or stone or metal that was carved or somehow shaped in the image of one of these other deities was the way by which that deity entered the world. They came into the world and then had influence on people through that graven image, through that wood or stone or metal image. Okay? Well, what God says is I don't need any graven images. I don't need any depictions of myself. I deal with my people directly. Now remember where he's saying this. On the mountain, fire, thunder, smoke, the ground shaking and everything. I'm real. I'm relating to them in the first person. I don't need any graven idols or images. And for other deities to say that they have to come into the world through that to have any influence is to say they are less than me, which really ties it back into the first commandment. You will have no other gods other than me because I relate to you directly. These other gods aren't as powerful. They aren't as this, they aren't as that. And it goes on and on and on. Okay. So the second commandment is incorporated and understood in relationship to the first. And Yahweh's zeal or his passion is very closely related to his holiness. And he was adamant about that. He will not tolerate reverence that was due him to be exhibited to somebody or something else. His holiness and his zeal burns like a devouring fire. It says, well, actually that's in Joshua chapter 24. His judgment doesn't rest with the person who actually does that graven image thing. But notice it says to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. And that's how he feels. If you make a graven image, you must hate God. You spit in his face. You've turned your back on him. So he'll punish not just the person who did it, but all the way down through 4 generations. That's a long time to carry out a grudge. However, in contrast to that, notice what he also says: the mercy of God will continue for 1,000 generations to those who honor me. Big difference. So God's making a really strong point there about the whole business of graven images. Okay. There's a prohibitive there. There's the thing about do not do this because this is an extreme insult to God. The worship of images is understood as encroaching on God's turf, his territory, if you will. But it's not stated that way in the commandment, but that's exactly what's going on. Let's see. Okay, let's look at the 3rd commandment. We usually know this as you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, right? It doesn't say that in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it says you will not abuse the name of the Lord your God. You will not abuse his name. Well, you get into the Hebrew word there that's used. Wait a minute. I skipped a page. Nope, I'm on 3. Okay. You get the Hebrew word there is saker, saker, which means to bear false witness, to make up stories, to fib. The other phrase that goes along with that, that's used interchangeably in Hebrew, and this is why we have so many problems translating Hebrew, is edsah, which edsah is a parallel to that term, which means you shall not swear by my name falsely. So if you're in court, you say, I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help me God. And then you lie, you're breaking the 3rd commandment. That's abusing God's name. Okay, that's about as good as I can explain it with nobody understanding or knowing Hebrew here.
Pastor,
Yeah.
how do you teach that to your little children or your grandchildren, for instance, that they don't go off saying, oh my God, or God, did you see that? Or how, besides modeling it, how else do you teach it?
Well, you teach them that God's name, first of all, that God's name is holy.
Right.
And we respect God. And so, we don't say, grandma this and grandma that, because we respect our grandmother, our mom, and our dad. So we also respect God. And so part of that respect and loving God is to not use his name in the wrong way. And call his attention to us if we're praying to him. But if we're just making an exclamation, that's kind of, abusing the name and not treating it with proper respect. Okay. So the whole idea of telling a falsehood and using God's name to give it credence is wrong. That's the 4th commandment, or the 3rd commandment, at least in the order that it is in Exodus 19, okay? Or 20, Exodus 20. 4th commandment. In this table, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, or remember to keep the Sabbath holy. This is the longest commandment in all of the 10 commandments here, as it's listed in Exodus 20. It develops a whole Old Testament institution of the Sabbath day. It carries on the tradition of God resting on the 7th day. Sabbath, or Shabbat in Hebrew, that's the Hebrew word, is from the word Shabbat, which means 7, or the 7th day. Okay, so on the 7th day, God rested. And so we rest on the 7th day, and we honor God, and we worship God, and we celebrate our relationship with God on the 7th day. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. We consecrate that day. We set that day apart for God and what we're doing with God and in relationship with God. Okay? Okay. The first part of it, 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. That's the positive command of this. And then there's also a negative aspect of that. You shall not work on the Sabbath. Now, those aren't different things that are in the same commandment, different truths, but they're two sides of the same coin. They go together. You work on 6 days and you rest on the seventh. And then on the seventh day, you will not work, but you'll do other things. You'll give respect, honor, love, praise, everything to God. Okay. So the major thrust of this commandment is to make the day holy, to set it aside for God's purpose, whatever that might be. It's not given to Israel for the first time at Mount Sinai because they had this tradition all the way back to Moses or to Abraham and before of recognizing what God did on the seventh day in creation and honoring that by mimicking what God did in their relationship with God. They thought that was a way to honor him by doing the things that he did, that God did on the seventh day. Okay, the basic reason for obeying this command is because God said to do it. God commanded it. So God says you got to do it. You should do it. You should do it. Another piece of this that's in and with this is that you're supposed to be remembering what God did for you when he brought you out of Egypt. So it's a direct throwback to the Exodus itself. This is what God did for you. So on this seventh day, you take the time and you honor him for his relationship and his gift to you, his redemption of you from slavery. So they're commanded in order to remember not only their slavery, but their deliverance. They're to keep it holy by referencing God and worshiping God and not working. But you could work on up to that. Okay, let's see. Anything else? Okay, let's get into, in this table, the fifth commandment is honor your father and mother. This is probably going to be the most unique one to us because it's going to be very surprising when you find out what the Hebrew words actually are here. I'm just going to be straight up with you and tell you the Hebrew words do not say honor your father and mother so it may be well with you and you can live long on the face of the earth. That is not what it says. Okay? So, at the heart of the original prohibition here, literally translated, you shall not curse your father or your mother. Big difference, huh? That's really different than what we learned. Confirmation class, no kid, well, most middle school kids at least, wouldn't think of cursing their parents. What this has to do with is the fact that as parents aged and they could no longer work or support or make a contribution to the family, some families turn them out. If you're not going to help support the family, then you don't belong here. You go fend for yourself. And they would just, chase them out of the household. They wouldn't provide food for them anymore. They wouldn't give them shelter. They wouldn't give them anything. They just cast them out. So it's basically the curse of the older generation. It was almost as if you're treating them as they're worthless. So it protects the parents from being driven out of the house or abused after they could no longer work and positively contribute to the family. Now, the Hebrew word that is in there about honoring, it is sometimes translated as honoring, also means to prize highly, to think a great deal of, which is where I think we kind of get the term in English to honor your father and mother, but to prize them highly, to think of them as very important, to show respect, to glorify, to lift up, to say how wonderful they are and think how wonderful they are in your head. That's what this commandment is about. It also has shades of meaning of showing affection and care. So it's the opposite of abusing your parents. What that word actually means, that we translate as honor, means to think highly of, to think that they're very special, to prize them, to think they're the best thing that's going, is the complete opposite of abusing them. And that's the gist of this whole commandment, is not to cast them out, not to throw them away like yesterday's news or garbage, but to hang on to them because of what they can teach you and what they can give you, to honor and respect them for all the things that they've done for you, which carries over theologically again to Israel's very relationship with God. So you see, there's theological strands running all through these 10 commandments. It's all part of the sealing of the covenant. This is why God gave these rules, is so that they learn to respect and trust God, just like they did their parents when they were growing up. And when they think they don't need God anymore, not to desert him, but to still honor him and still respect him and still treat him with care and love. Okay? That's that one. Now, the sixth one is another one that's hard, because the Hebrew word here for kill has absolutely no vowels in it. Absolutely none. It's often been translated, you shall not murder. It's the word in Hebrew is RSH. That's it. Three consonants, no vowels. So scholars have had a long time struggle with this. Now, words that come from that root word of RSH, one is called rasach. That refers to an actual murder, and that does have vowel sounds in it. That comes from the context of the phrase that it's in, the sentence that it's in. So it's like taking the law into your own hands and doing somebody in because you thought they deserved it. That's essentially what rasach means. Then there's another part of kill, which has to do with something in Hebrew called a goel, which is an avenger. So if somebody killed your brother, you're going to go out and become the goel. You're going to avenge your brother's death and kill the person who killed your brother. But that's also killing. RSH, the kill part. And so that person is thought of as a rozeach. Same three letters, RSH, but in the context of what's going on here, as the avenger, one who is seeking retribution, then they are spared from the idea of killing another person. Okay? Then there's also the same term, rozeach, also refers to murderer, one who kills intentionally for whatever reason. So you've got one who avenges and shouldn't be carrying the guilt. And then the same word can also mean murderer, one who kills out of whatever. So the Jews have a problem. If someone is accused as a rozeach and they didn't kill somebody intentionally, maybe it was an accident, maybe their ox got loose and trampled them or whatever, okay? There comes a new definition of the RSH word, and that's the raziach. That's a person who kills out of deceit or hatred or anger. That becomes equated with murder. And the rozeach is someone that it happened unintentionally. They didn't mean to kill that person. And so what the Jews did at that point is they set up something called sanctuary cities. The Roseach people who were accused of a murder would go into this city. They would still be considered a murderer. They killed somebody, but they couldn't be punished until the court actually settled the case. So they couldn't be taken out and killed until the court had its say, the judges or one of the priests or the prophet or something like that. So you get all these different interpretations, all these different meanings. What we've basically boiled it down to in English is it's wrong to kill no matter what. But then you have things like, well, what do you do in war? What do you do if you want to put to death a criminal? What do you do if, and you've got all these what ifs, all these gray areas that you've got to figure out what to do with. And so we just simplified it in English. We just said, thou shalt not kill. And that's the way we leave it. But there's so many levels and shades of killing in this commandment. And in the commandment, it tries to figure out all those different interpretations of those three letters and what they could all possibly mean and what it means for the children of Israel at the time. Unfortunately, God didn't, when he gave the 10 commandments, didn't really give them a set of, okay, in this instance, this is what you do. That didn't happen. Okay, let's look at the 7th commandment here. We've just got a couple minutes left. You shall not commit adultery. This one is very straightforward. The word for adultery in Hebrew, na'ap, N-A-A-P, two separate words, na'ap. What that means is you are to maintain the sanctity of marriage at all costs. Maintain the sanctity of marriage at all cost. The punishment for adultery is death. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's how strongly they believed in that. Now, having said that, in ancient Israelite and the other cultures that were around at the time, Canaanite, etc., seduction or violation of a virgin requires the man either to marry the girl or to pay a money equivalent for what he's done. And throughout the Old Testament, adultery was altogether different than fornication. In other words, if a man had intercourse outside of marriage with an unbetrothed and unmarried woman, that was not wrong at all. Men could do that. No questions asked. I know, I see you laughing, Sue. I know. It doesn't sound right, does it? But that's the way they did it. And the seduction of an unbetrothed daughter was simply thought of as an offense, and I'm sorry, an offense against property. And you were expected to pay a price for that, a fine, a monetary amount. It was judged as a moral offense. It was shameful, in other words, but that was as far as they went. But if you went and had relations with another married woman, or you were married and had relations with another married woman, both parties would be put to death. They didn't mess around. The sanctity of marriage was it. Now we've got all through the Old Testament, there's all kinds of stories about this happening. You got Abimelech. We read about him in Genesis. He accuses Abraham of bringing on him and his kingdom a great sin. Remember, Abimelech thought Sarah was his sister and not his wife. So this is another culture. This is a Babylonian culture who also thought that adultery should be punishable by death. Then you got Joseph. He tells Potiphar's wife to back off. She tries to get him into a relationship. She's a married woman, and Joseph's not having any of that. Don't get me to do the worst sin in the world here, because I'll be killed for that. So he backs off from that. In fact, his words are, don't tempt me to do this great wickedness and sin against God. And then, of course, the most famous one, David and Bathsheba. Remember how he got around it? he took Bathsheba's husband and sent him to the front so he would be killed, so he could have Bathsheba as his own wife, mistress, concubine, whatever you want to say. So there were ways that they tried to figure out how to get around it, but that was a deadly sin. Okay, 8th commandment, you shall not steal. The verb to steal in Hebrew is again 3 letters, G and B in Hebrew. It's talking about a specific object. This commandment was originally written, and the way we know that is because of the way the grammar is, that it's talking about a specific object that one person has that you are not allowed to take as your own. We have no idea what that object was. That's been lost to history. But that's the beginnings of this commandment because of the way it's structured. It contained a concrete object and was directed specifically against taking that object. Then later it was spread over to taking or kidnapping people. You shall not take people as your own. Generally in Israel, stealing was punished by means of a fine or something like that. It wasn't often thought of as being put to death. They didn't think about putting you to death for that, but it was definitely wrong to take something that belonged to somebody else, whether you did it secretly or you did it openly or however, it didn't matter. Okay, number 9, you shall not testify against your neighbor as a lying witness. That's the original Hebrew translation. It doesn't say you shall not lie. It says you shall not be a lying witness. So if you go to court, you lie about somebody, that's what this commandment's talking about. You don't do that. That's not right. It's directed primarily against guarding the basic right of a member of the covenant people, the people of Israel, against the threat of false accusation. The original commandment is not a general prohibition of lying, but it forbids lying when it comes to testifying about another person's character or action. Simple as that. And then the 10th commandment, at least in the Exodus 20 grouping, is you shall not covet your neighbor's house, maidservant, manservant, yada, 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 all that other stuff. Lutherans and Catholics both decided very early on that was way too much for one commandment, and they divided this up into 2 commandments. Okay, you need to know that Lutherans and Catholics did that. The original command was directed so that desire, which included, of course, an intrigue which led to acquiring the coveted property, was wrong. You don't try to figure out a way to manipulate or connive or blackmail or something to get something that somebody else has for your own just because it looks really cool and you want it. And that's the 10th commandment. Now, there's all kinds of other stuff that we could get into with the meanings and all that, but we are out of time for today. And I don't want to keep you any longer than that. I want to give some time for some discussion and some talk. Okay? So questions, comments?
It's nice to hear the Hebrew translation of all this, but to me, it still kind of comes down clear cut. What we know in English isn't that far off from the Hebrew meanings. It's more complicated with the Hebrew meanings, but the basic commandments for us to follow are still the same as far as what I see.
Yeah, and the reason that I did the Hebrew stuff was just so that you knew the background and sort of the backstory of it and how it was originally intended. And then, of course, you're right. What we interpret that is really our code for behavior when you think about it. It's what most of our laws are based on.
I agree with what you just said in the fact that if you're thinking about a republic or a democracy, whether it be the Greek early on, you know, what they were doing, etc. about stealing or bearing false witness or whatever, and how we've incorporated it into our laws today.
Yeah, Karen.
I can't really see the top of the mountains. Is it possible to bring that picture down a little bit? I don't know why. It's kind of cutting it off.
I can see it.
Well, there's actually two peaks,
Yeah, I can see the two peaks.
and the original picture doesn't have the top of the back peak anyway.
Oh,
That's
okay.
the complete picture. But the shadow part there, that looks like it's in shadow, that's the part that's burnt.
I looked that up and they're about 7,200 feet in elevation, but they're not
Right.
the highest ones. They're surrounded
No.
by it.
Right. They're not real high, but, and then if I had a different view of it, which I'll bring in when we talk about the golden calf, you can see the plain down in front of the mountain, the valley there, where they actually constructed the golden calf. And we'll have that, at least I'll have that picture when we get to that point. You can see how it all sets together. You know,
Some
you
of
can,
the Ten- Some
Go
of the
ahead.
Ten Commandments too, I think is where some of the extremists can take things so literally as far as how they're interpreted, what the punishment should be, how you should react, the old eye for an eye, things that was originally in the Bible. You know, some people still want to hang on to that.
right. Yep.
And because it's in the Bible, they feel that's their way of saying it's the way it should be.
Yeah,
Well,
they feel justified.
those that have committed adultery don't get killed either.
No,
I mean, now.
Just by a jealous husband.
that's true.
How much we have justified with all that's been going on with the looting and all the stealing and so forth that went on with I mean, people justified that they could do that stealing because they were angry and they were with the way things were in this world. So we've come a long way off of the 10 Commandments, I'm afraid.
Yes, we have. And they feel like it's their right.
Yeah.
You know, there is no corporate sanctity anymore, you know, where people think about the good of the whole people. They just think about themselves. And that's the hard part.
I think that looting and stuff, sometimes I think they just use the bad that's been happening
Right.
to loot. And some of them, and also some of them think they've been hurt, so they want to hurt somebody back. But they're not hurting the people back that actually did the bad, you know, and they just do the looting, which is just insane. And fires and everything else that they do at that time is.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the people doing the looting aren't the protesters.
Well, that's true.
I agree.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
true.
You're right. It's just people who see an opportunity to get something for nothing.
Right. Yeah.
I heard more than once as a child about, the 10 Commandments, honor your mother and father. And of course, my thing is so that means, and do as I say, not as I do. And I'd go, that doesn't make any sense to me, sometimes, but, but more than once, you'd hear that or something like that. Is that showing your dad respect, or is that showing, type of a deal? And not a lot, but it was brought up amongst us 8 kids more than once.
Well, my dad would say that and then kind of chuckle afterwards. He'd say, well, you got to do what I say, not what I do. And then he'd kind of laugh. I mean, he knew.
Yeah.
My mother always used to say, well, you do what you think is best. Well, of course you weren't going to do it then. because-
My dad always emphasized so that you may live long on the face of the earth, which implied that if you didn't honor your mom and dad, you weren't going to live long.
Yeah, that sounded like a threat.
And no a little Star Wars in there, live long and prosper.
Yeah. My dad always used to say, as long as you got your feet under my table.
Right,
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
yeah.
Are you sleeping in my bed, in my house?
Yeah.
I always thought it was interesting that this commandment was about respecting them. It doesn't say anything about liking them.
Right.
You're right.
You mentioned there, live long and prosper. You know, I can't do it, but you know where Spock would go like that with his fingers, and he'd say, live long and prosper.
Who's got it?
That actually, look at there, you
I
guys
can't do
can.
that.
That symbol really is
That way?
something from the Jewish side that the Levites used when they pray blessings.
Michelle, Renee, I mean.
Oh,
That's close as I get.
Do you know why that appeared in Star Trek to start with? Because Gene
No.
Roddenberry was Jewish.
Oh, wow. No, I didn't.
hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. There are a lot of Jewish and Christian symbolism in Star Trek and Star Wars both.
That might have to be another lesson far down the road. Or a Friday afternoon one,
Wait.
coffee hour one.
I've got a whole book on movies and theology.
Good.
Now
More
we have
You realize.
DVDs.
Yeah, not to change the subject completely, but I did actually pay to watch the movie Minari that won some Oscars and acclaimed. And I did it because of just relating to my adopted brothers from Korea, even, and different things like this. Excellent movie, kind of like a documentary, very good. Couple of places it runs slow, but I highly recommend it if you have time to watch a movie.
What was it?
Okay. Well, for next time, we will look at the last part of chapter 20 and then go through chapter 23, all the way up to verse 33 of 20.
All the way through 23?
Yep.
Wow.
We won't get that far, but
Okay.
but the reason that's all included as a section, because that's the statutes and ordinances that God established in the covenant with Israel.
That's
And
up
so
to
ju-
stopping.
we'll get as far as we can, but that's
Okay.
what we're going to look at, start with anyway, next time. Okay.
Okay.
All right. See y'all later.
See you Friday.
Hey, Rita, I have a question
Bye-bye.
quickly. Refresh my memory. How much does it cost for flowers for the church altar?
$30.
Thank you. When I send the next check, and I'll just leave dates open for you to take care of, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you all Friday.
Friday.